So I want you to imagine, if you will, a massive stadium.
Right, like a really colossal concrete bowl.
Exactly. It is vibrating under the night sky, and the air is it's practically humming with the kinetic energy of 70,000 screaming fans.
Oh yeah, the lights are blinding.
Blinding. And the bass from the speakers is physically thumping against your ribcage. And looking out, you see this seemingly endless sea of glitter, friendship bracelets, and just unbridled raw emotion.
You are standing in the absolute epicenter of a modern pop spectacle.
Which is loud, chaotic, and entirely overwhelming, But now I want you to take that image, hold it in your mind, and suddenly just transport yourself to a completely different location.
Total change of scenery.
Yeah. The noise drops to zero. Imagine a dimly lit, slightly dusty 19th century library in Copenhagen.
The air is heavy still.
It smells of aging paper, damp wool, and leather-bound books. And there's a solitary figure sitting hunched over a heavy oak desk, scratching away with a quill by the flickering, unsteady light of a single candle.
Completely alone.
Completely alone. And he's wrestling in total silence with the most terrifying foundational questions of human existence. Today, you and I have a very specific, honestly, highly unusual mission for this deep dive.
It's a great mission, though.
It is. Our mission is to prove to you that these two completely different places, the roaring pop stadium and the silent, brooding library, are actually the exact same room.
It is just a phenomenal premise. And it is the central argument of the incredibly subversive, utterly fascinating source material we are exploring today.
The book is wild.
It really is. The book you brought to us is titled Love Story, Kierkegaard Meets Taylor Swift.
Such a good title.
Right. And the author has chosen to publish under a Taiwanese Mandarin pseudonym, which translates to mouse-colored cat.
Mouse-colored cat. I love that so much.
We have very little biographical information about them, actually. I mean, they might be a former programmer turned lawyer, or perhaps an academic philosopher working somewhere between Brussels, Antwerp, and Krakow.
A total mystery.
Exactly. But whoever this mysterious cat is, they have presented us with a thesis that is both brilliantly absurd and, the deeper you look into it, profoundly compelling.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the premise on its face is just wild. The author is essentially asking, what if Taylor Swift's songs are not just catchy pop anthems?
Right. What if they're more?
Yeah, what if they are actually highly precise, meticulously constructed pop translations of major philosophical theses?
And not just one or two accidental overlaps either.
No, the author claims to have identified nearly 200 of these philosophical correspondences spanning her entire discography.
Which is staggering.
It's unbelievable. The suggestion here is that these songs are essentially Trojan horses, Smuggling complex, centuries-old philosophical frameworks into the minds of millions of people under the guise of 3.5-minute radio hits.
And today, we're going to want to focus our lens on just one of those pairings.
Just one. We are going to explore how a pop song about Romeo and Juliet secretly houses one of the most terrifying, dizzying concepts in existential philosophy.
The leap of faith.
Exactly, the leap of faith.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see why I asked to have this visual backdrop behind me today. This mix of the ancient, towering bookshelves filled with heavy philosophical tomes set right alongside these expansive, almost chaotic star charts mapping out the cosmos.
It really sets the mood.
Because what we are doing here is not just a gimmick. We aren't mashing up two unrelated things just for the sake of internet entertainment.
No, it's way deeper than that.
This is a serious exploration of a fundamental human truth. The questions that keep you up at 2 in the morning. Those looping, agonizing thoughts about love, about risk, about identity, about whether you're making the right choices or totally ruining your own life.
We all have those.
We do. And those are the exact same questions that have haunted philosophers for 25 centuries. The packaging has changed, sure.
Yeah, the delivery mechanism has shifted from a leather-bound manuscript to a Spotify stream.
Precisely. But the underlying human anxiety is absolutely identical.
And that packaging is exactly where we need to start. Because the author doesn't hide from the obvious reaction this book is going to get.
Right. They tackle it head-on in the preface.
Yeah, they acknowledge that taking this book, a text that pairs a global pop star with the founding father of existentialism, and handing it to a serious academic or a highbrow intellectual is going to elicit a very specific, immediate physical reaction.
She's going to make them smirk.
Yes. The smirk. You might even be smirking right now just listening to this deep dive.
I mean, I smirked when I first read the title.
Same here. But the author makes a brilliant pivot. The real question the book poses right out of the gate isn't, is Taylor Swift philosophical?
No, the real question we have to ask ourselves is, why does that idea make us smirk in the first place?
That is such a good flip.
That is the crux of the opening argument. And to answer that question, to dissect that smirk, the author brings in the work of the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu,
Okay, let's get into Bourdieu.
specifically drawing on his landmark 1979 book, Distinction. Bourdieu spent his career analyzing how society creates, enforces, and maintains hierarchies.
Right.
And his insight here is crucial to everything we're going to discuss. When we look at the divide between what society labels high culture like reading Kierkegaard, attending the opera, or debating abstract philosophy.
All the fancy stuff.
Exactly. And low culture like listening to a pop song, watching reality TV, or screaming at a stadium concert. We inherently assume that the difference is about intellectual depth.
We're totally conditioned to think that.
We are taught to assume that high culture is inherently profound, difficult, and valuable, while low culture is inherently shallow, easy, and disposable.
But Bourdieu says that's a lie.
He argues that this assumption is a complete illusion. The divide isn't about intellectual depth at all. It's about social sorting.
Social sorting, let's break that down for a second. Are we talking about like gatekeeping, just a way for people to feel superior to others?
It is the ultimate form of gatekeeping, yes. Bourdieu introduces the concept of cultural capital. Just as economic capital is money and assets, cultural capital refers to the knowledge, tastes, and behaviors that signal your social status.
Okay, that makes sense.
High culture is designed to circulate exclusively with academic credentials. It requires a university syllabus, a professor, a degree, and a very specific, often impenetrable vocabulary to access.
Because it has a massive barrier to entry, it holds immense prestige.
Exactly. It allows the people who can access it to signal to each other, I belong to this elite group.
Wow.
Low culture, on the other hand, circulates with Spotify playlists and radio waves. It is accessible to everyone instantly, regardless of their education or bank account.
So Bourdieu's point, which the author is highlighting here, is that pop culture is suspect to serious people, not because it lacks actual complexity, but because it spreads too widely to function as a status signal.
That is perfectly stated.
If a profound philosophical concept is suddenly understood and deeply felt by 70 million people simultaneously through a pop song, it loses its power to elevate the few who previously held the monopoly on that knowledge. The exclusivity is just destroyed.
Exactly. The smirk isn't a reaction to a lack of philosophical rigor. The smirk is a defense mechanism.
A defense mechanism. I love that.
It is an intellectual immune response, trying to protect the boundary of high culture. Because if pop music can do the exact same heavy lifting as a dense philosophical treatise, then the cultural capital of the intellectual elite is suddenly devalued.
I love this, and I want to push on this idea a bit. Think about your own biases for a second, When you hear the word philosophy, what pops into your head?
An old man with a beard and a toga.
Exactly. Or a professor in a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches standing in front of a chalkboard. And when you hear pop music, you picture glitter, choreography, and catchy hooks.
A completely different aesthetic.
Right. But is an idea inherently less profound just because it's set to a catchy bridge and an upbeat tempo?
Definitely not.
It feels to me like we are judging the worth of a human being based entirely on whether they're wearing a tuxedo or sweatpants.
That's a great analogy.
If I explain the concept of existential dread to you while wearing a tuxedo at a high society black tie gala, you might nod thoughtfully, swirl your champagne, and call me a visionary.
Oh, absolutely.
But if I explain the exact same concept to you while wearing sweatpants in the drive-thru line of a fast food restaurant, you might just think I'm having a mental breakdown.
They'd probably call security.
Right. But the person inside the clothes is exactly the same. The idea being communicated is exactly the same. Society treats them entirely differently based purely on the packaging and the context.
That is a perfect visceral analogy. We constantly confuse the packaging with the substance. And the author argues that recognizing this bias dismantling that smirk is the necessary prerequisite for reading this book.
You have to drop the ego.
You do. Once you realize that clarity is not the same thing as betrayal, and that simplifying a concept to reach millions of people does not necessarily flatten the truth of that concept, you give yourself permission to actually read between the lines.
To translate a dense idea into a pop song is an immense risk.
But the author tells us that this risk is fundamentally democratic. If we strip away the academic gatekeeping, we suddenly see that what is often dismissed as the trivial superficiality of teenage emotions is actually wrestling with the exact same ontological weight as classical philosophy.
Okay, ontological weight. Let's make sure we're not doing the exact gatekeeping we're critiquing here.
Fair enough.
When we say ontological weight, we're talking about the nature of being, right?
Right.
The fundamental reality of existing and feeling.
Yes, exactly. Ontology is the philosophical study of being, of existence, of reality itself. So when we say teenage emotions carry ontological weight, we mean that a teenager's heartbreak isn't just a biological overreaction.
Right, it's not just hormones.
No, it is a profound confrontation with the reality of human existence, loss, and identity. Which leads us directly into one of the most striking creative parts of the book.
The apocryphal foreword.
Yes.
So, to really hammer home this idea that pop packaging holds deep meaning, the author does something fascinating. The book contains an imaginary foreword titled Taylor's Way.
And the author is very clear. This was not actually written by Taylor Swift.
No, it is a literary device, an imagined perspective written from her point of view at 2 a.m., designed to bridge the gap between the pop world and the philosophical world.
And it reads like a deeply vulnerable confession.
It really does. The imaginary pop star writes about spending half her life trying to capture lightning in a bottle, sitting on the floor in pajamas, scribbling frantically in spiral notebooks.
Just trying to make sense of the chaos.
She talks about the intense criticism she faced, being told constantly that she was too much, that her feelings were too loud, too feminine, and that she just wrote silly breakup songs for teenage girls.
What is so powerful about this section is how the text completely reclaims that exact criticism.
How so?
Well, the prevailing societal narrative, the one enforced by the Smirk, is that adolescence is a time of trivial drama. It's something you are supposed to grow out of so you can become a rational, unfeeling adult.
Right, like it's a phase to survive.
Exactly. But this foreword asserts the absolute opposite. It describes adolescence as a time when you feel the world with the violence of a summer storm.
The violence of a summer storm. That is incredible phrasing.
Think about the physical reality of that phrasing. A summer storm is not trivial. It is a massive, uncontrollable force of nature that can rip trees from the ground. It darkens the sky and shakes the earth.
Wow. Yeah.
The text is elevating teenage emotion to the level of the sublime. When you are 15 and experiencing your first real heartbreak, it is not a minor inconvenience. It truly feels like the ontological collapse of your entire universe.
Because it is. In your world, it is.
The book argues that this intensity isn't a weakness or a lack of maturity. It is a profound, raw sensitivity to the human condition that adults spend the rest of their lives trying to numb.
The foreword has this line that just stopped me in my tracks. It says, "Your tears are ink, your doubts are philosophy."
It is beautiful.
Because it's true. Think about those sleepless nights in your teens or 20s, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you are defined by the people who love you or if you are defined by the people who leave you.
Such a heavy question.
Wondering if anyone will ever truly know you. That is not just teenage angst. As the book suggests, that is Jean-Paul Sartre. That is Plato.
Just wearing pajamas instead of Greek robes.
Exactly. We dismiss it purely because it's coming from a young woman with an acoustic guitar instead of a 50-year-old man smoking a pipe in a university lounge.
And to ground this argument, the author embeds these brilliant little conceptual Easter eggs throughout the foreword, tying this massive philosophical weight to specific touchstones in the pop star's discography.
Give us an example.
For instance, the text asks, why does the memory of a scarf left in a drawer weigh more heavily than an entire decade? This is obviously referencing the song All Too Well, which centers on a forgotten scarf.
The famous scarf.
The famous scarf. But the author forces us to look at it from a philosophical standpoint, specifically exploring the phenomenology of memory.
Okay, stop right there. Phenomenology of memory. That sounds like exactly the kind of academic jargon Professor Tweedjacket would use to keep us out.
Guilty as charged.
What does that actually mean when we're talking about a scarf in a drawer?
Fair point. Let's break it down. Phenomenology, in very simple terms, is the philosophical study of how we experience things from a first-person perspective.
Okay.
It's not about what an object objectively is. It's about how an object appears to our consciousness and what meaning it holds for us.
So it's subjective.
Completely.
Yeah.
So, objectively, a scarf is just a few ounces of knitted red wool. It has no inherent weight. But phenomenologically, human consciousness projects meaning onto that object.
Oh, I see.
The scarf absorbs the essence of the relationship. The scent of the person, the memory of the autumn air, the specific feeling of being loved at that exact moment in time.
So when the relationship ends, the physical scarf becomes a psychological anchor.
Precisely. Its phenomenological weight eclipses 10 years of lived time because it is the physical manifestation of a dead universe.
That is incredible. The scarf isn't a piece of clothing, it's a ghost.
It's a ghost. And the text does this with other songs, too. It talks about signing a pact with destiny in red ink.
Referencing the album Red.
Right, framing romantic commitment not just as a choice, but as a fatalistic, almost Faustian bargain, where you are trading your peace of mind for the chaos of love.
Wow.
It asks if we really become clean when the rain falls, pointing to the song Clean, but it elevates it to a fundamentally philosophical question about absolution, renewal, and whether the human self can ever truly be washed of its past trauma.
Or if we are permanently altered by the things we survive.
Exactly. And then, after laying out all this heavy existential groundwork, the foreword ends with this incredibly cheeky, self-aware line.
Oh, I know the one.
Apparently, Kant loved the bridge in Cruel Summer,
I laughed out loud when I read that.
which perfectly encapsulates the tone of the entire book.
Yeah.
It refuses to take itself too seriously while simultaneously demanding that we take these emotions seriously.
It's the perfect setup. We have completely validated the idea that raw, intense, messy, too much emotion is actually the breeding ground for true philosophy.
Absolutely.
We've established that the intense feelings we are taught to neatly categorize and dismiss as adults are actually the raw engines of human existence. And that realization transitions us perfectly to the historical figure at the center of this book.
The main event.
Because if adolescent emotion is this profound engine of inquiry, it completely reframes how we should look at the people who actually sat down to write these philosophies. We need to go back to 1813.
Let's do it.
We need to meet a man whose entire philosophical framework, his entire legacy, was built on the foundation of the most intense, agonizing, heartbreaking, romantic decision of his life. Let's talk about the melancholy Dane himself, Søren Kierkegaard.
To understand Kierkegaard's philosophy, you absolutely have to understand his biography. With some philosophers, you can separate the thought from the life. With Kierkegaard, the thought is the life.
They are completely intertwined.
He was born in Copenhagen into a deeply prosperous family. They had money, they had status, but they were psychologically suffocated by a terrifying darkness.
Which was brought on by his father, right?
Yes. His father, Michael Kierkegaard, was a deeply religious, incredibly strict man who carried a horrifying secret. As a young boy, impoverished and freezing while tending sheep on the Danish moors, Michael had cursed God.
He actually cursed God out loud.
He stood on a hill and yelled curses at the heavens for his miserable life. He later became wealthy, but he was convinced that because of that childhood act, God had placed a divine, inescapable curse upon his entire family.
A literal curse from God. I mean, that isn't just standard parental strictness. That is terrifying psychological abuse.
It was absolute certainty for the father. He believed that as a punishment, none of his children would outlive Jesus Christ, meaning he was convinced that every single one of his 7 children would die before reaching the age of 33.
That is so morbid to grow up with.
And the truly horrifying thing is, it almost seemed to be true. As Søren was growing up, he watched his siblings die one by one. 5 of Kierkegaard's 7 siblings died before his father did.
That is unimaginably heavy. The source text uses this brilliant phrase, saying Søren inherited anxiety as others inherit a country house.
It's so visceral.
It wasn't just a fleeting feeling of worry. It was his family estate. It was the air he breathed, the ground he walked on. So you have this brilliant, profoundly melancholic, intensely anxious young man who feels the literal weight of divine judgment and premature death hanging over his head at all times.
And then, amidst all this darkness, he falls in love.
Of course he does.
Yes. He falls deeply, passionately, almost overwhelmingly in love with a young woman named Regina Olsen. She is vibrant, full of life, essentially the opposite of his dark, brooding nature.
So they balance each other out.
They court, he proposes, she accepts, they get engaged. In any normal story, this is the happy ending. The melancholic philosopher is saved by the love of a good woman.
But this is Kierkegaard.
But this is Kierkegaard. He doesn't do simple happy endings. Shortly after the engagement, a terrible dread sets in. And abruptly, shockingly, he breaks it off.
Just like that.
He sends her back her ring with a cold letter.
Ah.
But here's the crucial distinction that the author draws out. Kierkegaard did not break up with Regina because he stopped loving her.
No.
In fact, he worshipped her. The book notes that he broke it off because he was too demanding of love.
Okay, wait, hold on. I have to call foul on this.
I figured you might.
I need to push back hard here because breaking up with someone and devastating them and then claiming you did it because your love is too profound or you're too demanding of love, that sounds like the ultimate toxic, cowardly excuse.
It really does sound like that.
Right? It's like, it's not you, it's me. My love is just too pure for this world. How is this the foundation of a revered philosophical movement and not just the actions of a guy who got cold feet and made up an intellectual excuse to bail?
That is exactly the reaction Regine's family had, and it's a perfectly natural modern reaction. It sounds like a cop-out. But you have to view this through Kierkegaard's specific, tortured lens and the societal context of 19th century Denmark.
Okay, set the scene for me.
Kierkegaard looked at the institution of marriage at that time. The social arrangements, the respectable Sunday dinners, the mundane daily routines, the expectation of being a normal, functioning civic pillar.
The whole white picket fence deal.
Exactly. And he felt that reducing his cosmic, overwhelming spiritual love for Regine to a mere social contract was a betrayal of that love.
Because it would make it boring.
Partially. He believed he was too melancholic, too burdened by his family's curse and his own dark obsession with God to be a good, normal husband. He thought he would destroy her light. He essentially viewed himself as a poison.
Wow, that is dark.
But fundamentally, he refused to let his extraordinary love become ordinary. He preferred to lose her entirely rather than see their love diluted by the mundane reality of paying bills and attending polite society parties.
So he essentially chose to preserve the relationship perfectly in amber in his own mind by destroying it in reality. He ghosted his fiancée to keep the vibe pure.
That is one way to put it.
That is just tragic and infuriating. But how on earth does that incredibly depressing historical event connect to a Taylor Swift song with a happy ending?
It connects because everything Kierkegaard wrote after that moment, the entire foundation of existentialism, stems from this single agonizing wound. He spent the rest of his life writing millions of words, trying to justify, explain, and understand what he had just done.
Trying to make sense of the ghosting.
Regine Olsen eventually moved on and married someone else, and she never truly knew what to make of Søren, whether he was a misunderstood, tortured genius, or exactly what you said, just a coward who couldn't commit.
Probably a bit of both.
But out of this intense personal pain, Kierkegaard developed what we call first-person philosophy.
First-person philosophy, meaning philosophy based on lived experience rather than abstract math.
Exactly. Before Kierkegaard, the dominant philosophical force was Hegel. Hegel built massive, abstract, totally logical systems to explain the universe, history, and the human spirit.
Very bird's-eye view.
It was all very neat, very objective, viewed from a detached, high-level perspective. Kierkegaard looked at Hegel's massive system and basically said, Hegel built a magnificent, sprawling castle, but he lives in a shack next door to it.
That's a great burn.
It is. Meaning, Hegel's philosophy looks great on paper, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the messy, terrifying reality of actually waking up as a human being and having to make choices.
Right.
Kierkegaard argued that existence precedes the system. Truth is not an abstract idea you study in a textbook. Truth is a decision you live. Truth is subjective. It is what you're willing to die for.
And to map out this lived reality, Kierkegaard broke human existence down into 3 distinct stages, right? The source text gives us a quick cheat sheet on this, which I think is vital for understanding the song connection later. Can we walk through these stages real quick?
We must. The 3 stages of existence are the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. We all start in the aesthetic stage.
What happens there?
This is the realm of pleasure, of sensory experience, of the immediate moment. The aesthete flits from one experience to another, seeking to avoid boredom at all costs.
Think of a modern person endlessly swiping on a dating app or doom-scrolling social media.
That's the perfect modern equivalent. You are constantly seeking the next thrill, the next hit of dopamine, the next beautiful face, but you never actually commit to anything. You remain a detached observer of your own life.
You are a consumer of experiences.
But eventually, the aesthetic life hollows you out. The endless consumption leads to a profound despair, a feeling of emptiness, which pushes you to leap to the next stage.
Which is the ethical stage, the realm of rules.
Precisely. The ethical stage is the realm of commitment, of promises, of societal duty. It's where you decide to stop swiping and actually settle down.
You get married, you sign a 30-year mortgage, you pay your taxes.
You join the PTA, and you live as a responsible, recognizable member of society. You find meaning in universal moral laws and doing what is expected of you. For 99% of people, the ethical stage is the ultimate goal. It is where you become a reasonable, good person.
Society loves the ethical stage because it keeps everything running smoothly.
Exactly.
But Kierkegaard wasn't satisfied with being reasonable. He looked at the ethical stage, looked at that comfortable 30-year mortgage and the polite dinner parties, and felt completely suffocated. Which brings us to the final, most terrifying stage.
The religious stage. And we need to be very clear here. Kierkegaard uses the word religious, but he's not talking about going to church on Sundays or following dogma.
Right, he was actually pretty critical of the church.
Fiercely critical, because it had turned faith into just another ethical rulebook. For Kierkegaard, the religious stage is the realm of the absurd. It is the paradoxical leap beyond logic, beyond reason, and beyond ethics.
Oh, wow. So throwing out the rule book completely.
In this stage, you are faced with a choice that makes absolutely no logical sense. A choice that society, and even your own ethical framework, might condemn as foolish or dangerous. But you choose it anyway.
You step out over the abyss.
Without any guarantee of success, propelled only by an inner, unprovable conviction. For Kierkegaard, to make this absurd choice is to risk losing yourself entirely. But not choosing staying perfectly safe in the ethical or aesthetic stage means you have failed to truly exist.
And here is the profound, heartbreaking irony of Kierkegaard's life. He wrote extensively about this leap of faith, but he wrote about it under dozens of pseudonyms.
Dozens of them.
The text points this out. He used names like Johannes de Slentio or Victor Eremita. It's as if he needed a whole chorus of fake identities to say the things he didn't have the courage to say under his own name.
It's tragic.
He wrote these massive, towering philosophical books that were essentially intensely coded love letters, simultaneously addressed to God and to Regin Olsen, the woman he gave up. He died at the age of 42, totally exhausted, literally collapsing in the street.
Just worn out by his own mind.
He believed with his entire soul that truth is a leap into the void that no one can take for you. But when he was standing on the edge of that void with Regine, he himself couldn't take the leap.
And that failure, that specific hesitation, is the key that unlocks this entire deep dive. The tragedy of Kierkegaard's life is that he stared at the precipice of commitment with the woman he deeply loved. He calculated the risks, he felt the vertigo, and he blinked.
He backed away.
He stepped backward into the safety of his melancholic, isolated intellect. And this is exactly where our source text makes its most brilliant, audacious maneuver. The author argues that the pop song love story is not a rejection of Kierkegaard's philosophy, but the ultimate, soaring fulfillment of it.
The song is an attempt to rectify the tragedy of Kierkegaard's real life.
Exactly.
This brings us to what might be my favorite part of the book, the dinner conversation chapter. The author sets up this hypothetical, highly entertaining debate at a dinner party between two distinct archetypes, a snob and a Swiftie.
It's such a fun setup.
The snob takes the predictable Bourdieu-esque route we discussed earlier. They roll their eyes, swirl their wine, and confidently state that love story is just a watered-down, sanitized version of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, created for teenagers who don't want to read classic literature.
Typical snob reaction.
They argue it's a fake fairy tale because the pop star fundamentally alters the ending. Shakespeare ends in a double suicide in a tomb. Taylor Swift adds a proposal, a ring, and a happy ending. The snob says this ruins the tragedy and makes it cheap.
And the Swiftie's rebuttal to the snob is an absolute masterclass in existential analysis. The Swiftie doesn't argue about music theory. They argue philosophy.
Okay, let's hear the rebuttal.
The Swiftie points out that Kierkegaard broke up with Regine because marriage felt too mundane, too obvious for his profound love. Taylor Swift, on the other hand, takes the ultimate legendary tragedy of Romeo and Juliet and saves it specifically by taking the leap Kierkegaard couldn't.
Wait, how so?
The Swiftie argues that in Kierkegaardian terms, the obvious path is poison. It is fatality.
Let's make sure that's crystal clear. What does the obvious path is poison mean in the context of Romeo and Juliet?
In the original Shakespeare text, Romeo and Juliet are trapped in a societal context that is entirely hostile to them. Their families, the Montagues and Capulets, are at war.
Right, the ultimate feuding families.
The societal rules, the ethical framework of Verona, all scream no to their union. Therefore, the logical, obvious, fatalistic conclusion of that setup is tragedy. That's what happens in Shakespeare. The environment demands death, and they succumb to the fatality of the obvious. They die.
Wow.
Shakespeare is actually the predictable outcome of that ethical dilemma.
That is wild. Okay, so the snob says Swift cheats by removing the death and tragedy. But the Swiftie counters that choosing the absurd yes over the obvious tragedy is the leap of faith.
Yes.
By rewriting the story so that it defies logic, defies the warring families, and defies the historical canonical text itself to end well, Swift is actually being more radical, more rebellious than Shakespeare.
She is doing exactly what Kierkegaard never had the courage to do. She takes the leap. She chooses the absurd yes over the logical no.
And look closely at the physical imagery the author focuses on to prove this point. In the song, the climax happens when Juliet is standing on a balcony. But the text argues that in the context of existentialism, this balcony isn't just a pretty architectural feature or a theatrical stage set.
No, it's something much more dangerous.
It is a polished precipice. A precipice is the edge of a cliff. It is a place of extreme, imminent danger. The text explicitly says, love demands vertigo, not just a ring.
Vertigo is that dizzying, terrifying sensation you get when you look down from a great height and realize you could fall and be shattered.
The leap of faith requires that vertigo. It requires the genuine, terrifying possibility of total destruction. When Romeo proposes, his promise isn't a legally binding contract drafted by lawyers. The text notes he promises eternity with a trembling pen.
That word trembling is vital.
It really is.
It implies fear, it implies uncertainty, it implies the raw human reality of the massive risk he is taking.
And the contrast in bravery between the 19th century philosopher and the 21st century pop star is stark, which the Swiftie points out to the snob.
It's embarrassing for Kierkegaard, honestly.
It really is.
Yeah.
Kierkegaard hid behind 30 different pseudonyms, writing cryptic books because he was terrified of saying I love you directly to the woman he wanted to marry. Taylor Swift, on the other hand, stands on a stadium stage and sings it at the top of her lungs directly to 70,000 people.
Which act is actually more existentially brave? Which one embraces the terrifying vulnerability of existence more fully?
The snob accuses the pop song of selling certainty wrapped in gift paper, calling it naive.
But the Swiftie powerfully clarifies there is absolutely no certainty in the song. Juliet doubts from the very beginning to the very end.
She waits on the balcony with zero empirical proof that Romeo is actually coming. And when he finally does arrive, she doesn't say, I knew it, as if she had just correctly solved a mathematical equation. She just says yes.
Saying yes without proof, that is the exact definition of Kierkegaardian faith. As the text summarizes beautifully in a section titled The Quick Cheat Sheet, the world, the ethical stage, wants reasonable couples who make logical sense on paper.
But true existence demands absurd gestures.
The real question when you are standing on that balcony isn't, is this logical? The question is, can I live without it? And if the answer is no, then you have no choice but to take the leap into the absurd.
I want to ask you, the listener, a question right now. Think about a specific time in your life when you waited on your own metaphorical balcony.
Everyone has one.
It doesn't have to be about romantic love. It could be that terrifying moment before you quit a stable job to start your own business. It could be moving across the country to a city where you don't know a single soul. It could be deciding to have a child.
Huge life moments.
Were you standing on that polished precipice, looking down at the vertigo-inducing drop, waiting desperately for a guarantee before you jumped? Were you waiting for a sign, an ironclad contract, a perfectly balanced spreadsheet that proved it would all work out without any pain?
Of course you were. We all do.
Because what Kierkegaard's tragedy and this pop song are both telling us is that the guarantee will never, ever come. The yes is powerful specifically because it is an answer based on a total lack of proof. It is a yes despite the void, not because you found a safe bridge across it.
That conceptual leap sounds incredibly poetic, almost romantic, when we frame it around moonlit balconies and trembling pens. But the author of our source text is incredibly sad.
Very sad.
They know that to truly dismantle the academic gatekeeping we discussed earlier, to truly defeat the smirk, they need to show how this pop song holds up against rigorous, cold, clinical academic logic.
Bring on the academics.
Which leads us to one of the most brilliant, satirical, and ultimately illuminating sections of the book, the dual analysis between Professor Malloch Merriwell and Gaston Blunder.
Oh, this section is spectacular. It is such a sharp critique of how academia ruins beautiful things. The author creates this fictional character, Professor Malloch Merriwell, who speaks in the most impenetrable, hyper-academic, painfully dry jargon imaginable.
That's almost unreadable on purpose.
He analyzes the pop song love story as if he's publishing a peer-reviewed paper in an obscure, high-level sociological journal. And I just have to read a little bit of his analysis because it perfectly illustrates the barrio Bourdieu was talking about.
Please do.
Professor Merriwell writes, We are dealing here with what I would designate as an effective discontinuity event within a higher-risk existential framework. He goes on to completely reject the naive interpretation that the song is just a romantic reconciliation narrative.
What is fascinating here is how the author uses Merriwell to translate Kierkegaard's passionate religious leap into the sterile language of probability, systems analysis, and data modeling. Merriwell claims, in his fictional study, to have run a longitudinal reconstruction of 10,000 binary commitment scenarios.
Naturally, 10,000.
And his finding, which he says is calibrated through a hybrid model of 19th century existential typologies and modern matrimonial rituals, reveals a decisive mathematical pattern.
Okay, what's his grand thesis?
He states, the probability of commitment increases inversely with the availability of rational justification.
Okay, my brain just hit a speed bump. The probability of commitment increases inversely with the availability of rational justification. That is such a convoluted $10 way of saying something incredibly beautiful.
It really is.
Let's translate Merriwell. He is saying the less sense it makes, the more real it is. The more reasons you have not to do it, the more your family objects, the more the timing is wrong, the more illogical it is, the more profound the choice becomes when you decide to do it anyway.
Exactly. Merriwell is mapping the leap of faith on a graph. And to do this, he introduces a concept he calls the balcony threshold.
The balcony threshold.
Think of it as a structural dividing line in the human mind. Below the balcony threshold, the subject is in the evaluation phase. You are in the ethical stage. You are gathering data, you are weighing pros and cons, you are seeking advice from your parents and friends, you are trying to be perfectly reasonable.
Checking all the boxes.
But above the threshold, evaluation completely stops. Above it, the subject leaps. Merriwell notes that Romeo's grand gesture, simply showing up at the balcony, is not actually logically persuasive. It doesn't legally solve the problems with their warring families.
It doesn't provide money or safety.
Merriwell says Romeo's presence is structurally insufficient, and that is precisely why it works. The yes Juliet gives is a rupture in the logic of proof. The subject doesn't resolve the uncertainty. She decides to act in spite of it.
And then, just as your eyes are starting to glaze over from Merriwell's academic gymnastics, the author introduces the antidote Gaston Blunder.
The hero we need.
Gaston Blunder is another fictional character, but he serves as the ultimate layman translator. He essentially bursts into the text, kicks over Merriwell's podium, and simplifies everything before Merriwell, as Gaston puts it, jumps off a balcony with a dictionary.
I love Gaston.
Blunder's translation of the exact same concept is punchy, raw, and completely accessible. He breaks the entire song and philosophical thesis down like this girl likes boy, problem everything says it's a bad idea, family, context, common sense, all screaming. No. So what does she do? She says, yes, that's it. No proof, no guarantee, no safety net, just yes.
Blunder captures the pure, terrifying essence of Kierkegaard perfectly without using a single philosophical term. He says people look at that choice, saying yes when everything screams no, and they call it stupid or naive because it doesn't make logical sense.
Says it doesn't.
But Blunder points out that defying logic is the whole point of love. And this brings us to what might be the defining, most memorable quote of this entire analysis. Blunder summarizes the entire concept of the leap by saying, if it made sense, it wouldn't be love. It would be a contract. And contracts don't need balconies. They need lawyers.
Contracts don't need balconies. They need lawyers. That line is brilliant. I want to frame it.
It's the thesis of the book right there.
Think about the ethical stage again. When you get married purely for tax benefits, or because it perfectly aligns with your 5-year career plan, or because your families are socioeconomically compatible and everyone approves, you aren't standing on a precipice. You are sitting safely in a boardroom.
Exactly. No danger at all.
There is absolutely no vertigo in a contract. You are mathematically minimizing risk. But because you minimize the risk, there's no leap of faith. It's just a transaction. Blunder hits the nail directly on the head when he concludes that most people don't fail at love because they pick the wrong person. They fail because they refuse to jump. They want the contract.
To synthesize these two completely different viewpoints, the hyper-academic and the layman, the author provides a multiple-choice quiz within the text, posing the ultimate question, what is really happening in love story?
Pop quiz time.
And they provide Merriwell's dry commentary for each option to show how academia misses the point. Is it A, a romantic reconciliation overcoming obstacles? No, Merriwell says that ignores the structural discontinuity.
Whatever that means.
Is it B, a modern fairy tale with a happy ending? No, that substitutes aesthetic comfort for existential tension. Is it C, a declaration of love based on mutual certainty? Absolutely not, because epistemic stability, meaning the secure knowledge that things will work out, is explicitly absent.
Epistemic stability, good grief.
The decision precedes the justification.
So the only correct answer is D, a leap of faith beyond rational justification. As Merriwell clumsily puts it, the subject commits in the total absence of proof, thereby suspending the demand for certainty.
It is not a resolution of a problem. It is the embrace of existential risk.
So at this point in the book, we have the historical philosophical theory. We have the satirical academic breakdown. We have the layman's translation. But the author isn't done.
Not even close.
They decide to bring this abstract, high-minded concept down into a visceral, almost cinematic reality. They ask a brilliant hypothetical question: what would actually happen if the architect of 19th century existentialism and the architect of 21st century pop somehow sat down next to each other to talk about this leap?
This brings us to a chapter titled The Unlikely Taxi Ride. The author imagines an Uber trip, which is specifically and bizarrely noted as a 7.2-kilometer ride through a rainy city at night between Taylor Swift and Søren Kierkegaard.
A completely surreal visual.
The dialogue is written like a stark, minimalist, incredibly tense stage play. Let me set the scene for you. It's raining heavily. The windshield wipers are rhythmically thumping. The city lights are streaking past the wet glass.
Very cinematic.
They're sitting in the back seat, staring straight ahead. Taylor breaks the silence. Reflecting on the song, reflecting on the choice Juliet makes, she says quietly, "It didn't make sense." And Kierkegaard, the man who destroyed his own life because things didn't make sense, replies softly, "Of course not."
Oof.
She says, "Everyone said no." He replies, "They always do." There's a heavy silence in the car. The tires hiss on the wet pavement. Then Taylor says, "I still said yes." Kierkegaard nods. That is the moment. She asks, "The moment of what?" And he replies, "Existence."
Wow. It's a profound exchange because he is validating that existence only happens in the defiance of the obvious.
But then the scene gets darker. Taylor looks at him and says, "Feels like I jumped." He agrees. "You did." And then she asks the ultimate terrifying human question, the question that paralyzes every single one of us when we are standing on our own balconies. She asks, "What if I was wrong?"
And Kierkegaard answers with the absolute, brutal, unvarnished truth. You cannot know.
"That's terrifying," she says.
That is why it matters, he replies. As the car begins to slow down, nearing the destination.
Taylor asks, "So love is just risk?"
No, Kierkegaard says, love is what remains when you accept the risk.
The ride ends as they pull up to the curb. Taylor asks one final question before opening the door. "And if I didn't jump?"
Kierkegaard looks at her and says, simply, then nothing begins.
The emotional weight of that scene is staggering.
It really is. You cannot know. That is the terror that Kierkegaard lived with every day of his life, and it's the exact terror we all try so desperately to avoid. We want the algorithm to tell us it's going to be okay. We want the guarantee.
We want the ironclad contract.
But Kierkegaard is sitting in the back of that imaginary Uber, telling us that the terror of not knowing is exactly what gives the choice its meaning. If you knew for absolutely certain it would work out flawlessly, it wouldn't be a leap of faith, it would just be a step on flat ground.
And the author reinforces this devastating point with a section called Letter from Philosopher, written as if Kierkegaard himself is directly addressing you, the reader, breaking the fourth wall.
What does he say?
He writes, "You think love is about finding the right person. It is not. It is about choosing without knowing. Romeo does not prove anything. He arrives. That is all."
Beautiful.
He warns us that standing on the balcony is not a safe romantic place. It is the bleeding edge of reality. But the most profound insight in that letter is about what we are actually waiting for when we hesitate on that edge. He says, "You are not waiting for certainty. You are waiting for the moment when you stop asking for it."
You are waiting for the moment when you stop asking for certainty. That hits so close to home. When we look back at the grand tragedy of Kierkegaard's real life, a man who spent his entire agonizingly short existence writing millions of brilliant words to explain exactly why he didn't take the risk with the woman he loved, and we place his life right next to Love Story.
A massive global pop anthem dedicated entirely to the act of taking that exact risk against all logical odds.
We finally see the full picture the author is painting. The pop song is the antidote to the philosopher's regret. The song is the alternate timeline. It is what Kierkegaard wished he had done.
But the author does not stop at romantic love. Because taking a leap of faith without a guarantee isn't just a rule for 19th century romance or for understanding the bridge of a 21st century pop song.
It's bigger than that.
It is a fundamental mechanism of human agency. And in the afterword of the book, the author makes a massive, unexpected pivot. They zoom out to show how this exact same human willingness to jump into the absurd might actually be the only thing that saves us from the impending catastrophic homogenization of our own technology.
Yes, the afterword is where this book goes from a clever cultural mashup to an urgent warning about the future. The author, our mysterious mouse-colored cat, titles this final section Antidote to Algorithmic Inbreeding.
A very provocative title.
Now, the author openly acknowledges right at the start of this section that they used large language models AI to help organize and draft parts of the book we just read. But they don't admit this is a gotcha or to diminish their own authorship. They do it specifically to illustrate a critical, terrifying point about the future of human thought.
This raises a vital question about what the author calls the paradox of infinite generation. To understand this, we have to look at how artificial intelligence actually works.
Let's get into it.
The author describes LLMs as stochastic parrots of infinity. Stochastic meaning randomly determined or based on probability. These models have ingested, read, and processed essentially everything ever digitized.
They know everything.
They have access to the entire recorded history of human literature, philosophy, science, and pop culture in milliseconds. But as the author points out, the machine understands absolutely nothing. It doesn't know what love is. It doesn't know what a balcony is.
Right.
It is simply a highly advanced probability engine predicting the next most statistically likely word based on its massive training data.
It's essentially the world's most powerful autocomplete.
Exactly. Now, when digital copying first became a widespread technology, the great promise was zero generation loss. If you made a photocopy of a physical piece of paper, the copy was a little fuzzier. If you copied the copy, it got worse.
The quality degrades.
But a digital copy of an image or text was supposed to be as pristine as the original, forever. But the author warns that today, the danger of AI isn't the degradation of the pixel or the text. It is the degradation of meaning.
That is a scary thought.
The more we rely on AI to generate our emails, our essays, our art, and our code, the less we actually create.
And this leads to a truly terrifying concept the author introduces called digital autophagy. Now, autophagy is literally translated as self-eating. It's a biological term used to describe when a cell consumes its own internal components.
Like a snake eating its own tail.
Exactly. But here, the author applies it to the internet and data. Let me explain how this works. Because AI is currently being used to generate massive amounts of content articles, blogs, Reddit posts, that content is flooding the internet.
Which becomes the new training data.
Which means that the next generation of new AI models are increasingly scraping the internet and training on data that was already generated by older AI models. It's a digital snake eating its own tail. It's feeding on its own synthetic outputs, creating these massive, recursive, closed loops.
And what happens when a probability engine trains on probabilistic output? The thought becomes smoother, it becomes safer, it becomes more conformist and perfectly aggressively average with every single iteration.
Because it's averaging out the average.
It shaves off the weird, the risky, the absurd, the highly unlikely ideas. By endlessly copying its own mathematically safe predictions, the machine produces conformity at scale, not intelligence.
It's the ultimate manifestation of Kierkegaard's ethical stage.
Precisely. The AI is the ultimate ethical citizen. It is a system entirely governed by rules, logic, and predictable, safe outcomes, completely devoid of any individual existential leap.
You can't leap.
An AI cannot stand on a polished precipice and feel vertigo. It doesn't have a body to feel the drop. It can only calculate the mathematical probability of a fall based on historical data. And so, the author proposes a radical solution to this impending homogenization, a way to break this algorithmic loop, which they call capacitivism.
Capacitivism. I love this concept. The author says that in this new AI-driven world, the solution isn't Ludditism. We don't just reject the digital photocopy entirely. We don't smash our laptops and run off to live in cabins in the woods.
That wouldn't work anyway.
Instead, we overwhelm the system. We overload it. We intentionally inject friction into the smooth circuit. The author argues that AI can organize existing information perfectly, but it cannot make a conceptual leap into the unknown.
So we have to do it for it.
So humans have to force the machine onto side roads. We have to introduce chaotic sparks that the system's historical training data cannot possibly anticipate.
Because there is no historical training data for true absurdity. The author gives these wonderful, evocative examples of what this looks like. There is no training data for putting Wittgenstein in a slam door or visualizing Deleuze in lipstick.
Or Kierkegaard and Taylor Swift.
Or, as we have spent the last hour exploring, connecting Kierkegaard's profound existential dread to the pop bridge of a Taylor Swift song about Romeo and Juliet. The author calls this deliberate act of unexpected connection intellectual vandalism.
Intellectual vandalism. That is brilliant.
And they argue it is a uniquely, irreplicably human capability.
The AI can tell you every single fact about Kierkegaard, and it can tell you every single lyric Taylor Swift ever wrote, but it would never mathematically deduce that they belong sitting next to each other at the same dinner table. Why?
Because historically, statistically, they don't.
Putting them together requires a human mind willing to misbehave creatively.
This connects back to Kierkegaard's philosophy so beautifully. Just as a logical, safe, perfectly calculated marriage contract is the death of romantic love, because it removes the vertigo, it removes the need for the leap. A perfectly smooth, safe, predictable, AI-generated loop of information is the death of creative thought.
We need the vertigo in our ideas, too.
Taking a leap of faith, making an absurd connection, engaging in this joyful intellectual vandalism. That is the ultimate proof of human existence in a digital age. The author states that the citizen of tomorrow will not be the one who passively consumes the algorithmic flow of information, but the one who violently bends it.
We have to disturb the logic. We have to be the unpredictable cat that wanders into the machine.
And this book itself, Love Story, Kierkegaard Meets Taylor Swift, is the physical artifact of that vandalism. The author includes a teaser list at the very end of the book, hinting at the rest of what they call the Philo Swift collection, just to show exactly how far this intellectual vandalism can go.
Oh, the other pairings.
We only looked at one song today, but they list other pairings that sound like absolute madness on the surface until you realize the method behind the chaos.
Yes. The list is a perfect demonstration of capacitivism. They pair the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who famously said you cannot step in the same river twice because everything is in constant flux and nothing is stable.
A classic philosophical concept.
They pair him with the song Out of the Woods, which is a track entirely driven by the repetitive, frantic anxiety of a chaotic, ever-changing relationship where you never know where you stand. It's a perfect match of philosophical theory and pop anxiety.
They pair Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, with the song Fortnight. They connect the heavy, mid-century political philosopher Hannah Arendt with the song Champagne Problems.
It's just wild.
They even link the ultimate legendary pessimist of Western philosophy, Arthur Schopenhauer, with the early country pop hit Teardrops on My Guitar. It is a deliberate, brilliant, almost joyous overloading of the academic system. It is humans loudly refusing to be predictable data points.
It is the insistence that meaning is found not in the isolated data points themselves, but in the improbable, absurd leaps we make between them. The algorithm can effortlessly tell you the tempo of the song and the exact publication date of the philosophy book.
You can summarize both in a second.
But only a human being standing on the edge of the balcony can actually feel the terrifying, beautiful resonance between the two. I want to thank you for joining us on this massive, genre-bending, century-spanning deep dive today. We started by looking at a roaring pop stadium and a dusty library, and we ended up in the back of a rainy taxicab with the inventor of existentialism, discussing how to break the algorithms that are quietly trying to rule our lives.
It's quite the journey.
We covered an immense amount of ground. But before we leave you today, I want to offer one final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go back into your normal everyday routine.
Something to think about.
We live in a world that is completely obsessed with algorithms. We have dating apps that promise to mathematically predict our romantic compatibility based on hundreds of data points, trying to ensure we never get our hearts broken.
We have recommendation engines that tell us exactly what we should watch, what we should read, and who we should follow based on what we already like.
We are essentially using our incredible technology to try and build a frictionless world where the balcony threshold simply doesn't exist anymore. We want every decision to be a statistically safe bet. We want the contract signed, sealed, and guaranteed before we ever agree to jump.
But if Søren Kierkegaard and this mysterious, brilliant, mouse-colored cat are right, then a life lived entirely on safe bets isn't really a human life at all.
No, it's just a simulation of one. True meaning, the kind of meaning that makes the universe vibrate, the kind that makes your hands tremble, only exists in the wild spaces that the algorithm cannot calculate. It only exists in the friction, in the risk, in the terrifying, absurd yes, when everything else in the world is screaming no.
So we ask you,
What is your personal balcony? Where in your life are you currently standing on the edge, looking down at the drop, endlessly evaluating, waiting for a statistical guarantee that will never ever come when what you really need to do is jump?
Yeah.